Thank you. I appreciate the introduction. Thank you for having me, everybody. I'm sure you're bouncing around in different workshops and whatnot. So I just want to say thanks for even attending this one. There's going to be a lot of things that I'm going to cover today about what it's actually like to be an activist in college, but also the good and the bad. So we're going to get into like the real bad, the unfortunate, death threats and the falling grades and things that you have to worry about when you actually engage in this work. But it shouldn't deter you, and I'll tell you why. But once again, my name is Dr. Cy Stokes. A postdoctoral research fellow is essentially like I'm like pre-professor. So by next year I'll be a professor somewhere, and so it's hard to explain, but that's all you need to know. But yeah, I got my PhD at USC, but what I'm going to be presenting on today is what I did in undergrad at UCLA, and this was back I think like almost 10 years ago. So you're going to see a little video of Baby Cy in a second, but this is what we did where we put together the social media activist kind of campaign together called the Black Bruins, and it was really just the 11 of us guys that you'll see in the video getting together, understanding that there were so many things that the world didn't know about what UCLA was really like. But it wasn't just UCLA; it was every institution of higher education, every college, university, like the undercurrents of racism that just get thrown under the rug. And we wanted to expose the institution that we were at. And so we took it to social media, we took it to YouTube, Twitter, whatever we can get our hands on, and we try to spread this message. And ended up the video you're about to watch right now has got like 2.4 million views or something like that in like 2 weeks. And it actually ended up influencing like institutional policy, got like international attention. So we got a lot of support from like Africa, Europe, and a lot of schools across the world. And so you'll see the impact of something that you can do in college when you get there. But this is what we did. So here we go. And there's no sound in the beginning, so don't worry.
In fall 2012, the total enrollment, graduate and undergraduate, for African American males at UCLA was 660 students. That's 3.3% of the 19,838 other males enrolled here.
Oh, did it pause?
It paused.
Out of that 660 African American male students, 65% are undergraduate athletes. The number of entering male freshman students was 2,418. Only 48 of them are African American. The graduation rate for African American males at UCLA is 74%, which means out of that 48 freshmen last year, only 35 are predicted to graduate. When we were children.
Just want to pause real quick. Is it echoing for you guys?
It is.
It is. Is everybody muted? I want to make sure.
Yes.
Let's see here.
We learned how to color.
Let me try something real quick. That's Baby Cy right there. Here we go. See if this works.
In fall 2012, the total enrollment, graduate and undergraduate, for African American males at UCLA was 660 students. That's 3.3% of the 19,838 other males enrolled here. Out of that 660 African American male students, 65% are undergraduate athletes. The number of entering male freshman students was 2,418. Only 48 of them are African American. The graduation rates for African American males at UCLA is 74%, which means out of that 48 freshmen last year, only 35 are predicted to graduate. When we were children, we learned how to mix colors with a paintbrush. We learned that white mixed with anything makes it brighter, but we wouldn't dare mix anything with brown or black, or else our entire creation would be ruined. What we failed to realize was that the untouched dark section of the paintbrush palette became the symbol of the melanin in our skin. The painter only used us to write words that were dark enough to be noticed on a white background. So if words are all we are good for, then don't you dare tell us to silence our voices when we choose to speak. Now you tell me that I should be proud to be at UCLA when only 35 of us are predicted to walk across that stage, when most of us are dropping out from the lack of financial aid, while Judy Olian, Dean of Anderson School of Management, just spent $647,000 on first-class flights and hotel stays. But waiting for an apology is asking for the impossible, because no snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible. But you tell me I should be proud to be a Bruin. When we have more national championships than we do black male freshmen, it's evident that our only purpose here is to improve your winning percentage. So now black high school kids can care less about grades, just as long as the number on the back of their jersey doesn't fade. And you tell me I should be proud to be a Bruin. But according to Professor Sander, 3.3% is far too many black kids. On its perfectly paved roads, there are far too many black kids. This school is not diverse just because you put it on a pamphlet. But you'll name a building after Albert Conasall, who publicly opposes affirmative action? The action that can make our fraction on your demographic pie chart look more than just a second hand on a clock. It's all talk, just to maintain this fraudulent reputation of this institutionalized racist corporation. They don't care about the cultural limitations of being a minority in society, so we have become our own painters, with our own palettes, and we have voices that speak defiantly. So we ignite the flames to help us find the path to our future. Increasing graduations, not incarcerations, transforming education because our numbers can't be any fewer. So don't be surprised that we have become rebellious for what has happened to us. When every black student in class feels like Rosa Parks on the bus, we are trying to rewind time with role reversal as our revenge, because we have no other choice when the university refuses to come to our defense. But we have come too far to let history repeat itself. Even when they are peeling off the dark fur of the Bruin pelt, because our faces are just used to cover up from the public what's really inside. Revitalizing lies to perpetuate your disguise. Stop pretending that the wounds of our past have healed. We're not asking for a handout. We're asking for a level playing field. Those with less opportunity are fighting for their position, trying to find their place. But those with privilege are hitting triples when they were already born on third base. So with all my brother's hopes and dreams that this university has tried to ruin, how the hell am I supposed to be proud to call myself a Bruin?
All right, make sure y'all see me good. So first of all, thank you for watching. Once again, that was like 8 years ago, something like that. So that was, undergrad sci, trying to take on a whole institution. So I'll tell you what the aftermath of that was. But first, whenever I present on this and I talk about this, I have to give a big shout out to Easy in the background here. We lost Easy about 2.5 years later, unfortunately. So, we always want to pay our respects whenever we, talk about this moment in time, because he was integral to the success of this movement. But unfortunately, his life was taken by an accident just 2.5 years later. So, word up to Easy. Thank you for everything you've done for us. And, hopefully we make you proud every day. With that being said, I also want to give a shout out to my family. So a lot of people, wonder, how I got into activism. My dad was an activist in the 60s at Howard University for the Black Power movement. And my mom immigrated here when she was 11 years old. She's full Chinese, so I'm Black and Chinese. But that has a huge influence on who I am as a person. And I'm sure with all of you, that's the same case, right? It's your family. That's and your community. That's why you do what you do. That's who you fight for. And for the rest of your college career, just career, your professional career, for your whole life, the reason you do things is for them, not for, the system itself or anything like that. You do it for your people and always your people. So, um, with that being said, let's get into the good part. All right, let's get into the positive effects of just this video. So once again, we came out with this video. It was just 11 of us through the Black Male Institute at UCLA. And there was, once again, 11 of us with one professor named Dr. Tyrone Howard, who is still my mentor to this day, one of the best human beings on the planet. But he put us all together and said, hey, look, we have all this data, all those numbers that we talked about. We had them, but the school's not putting them out. Like, there was all private data. And so behind closed doors, I don't think he knew we were doing this, but we said, screw it. We ended up, I knew I was a spoken word poet. I was already, competing and doing all these other things on a poetry level, but I ended up just writing a piece about this because we had all the numbers, and I was like, you know what, let's do something. And so I got all the guys together. I said, we're going to make a video. We're going to post it. We don't care if it gets, just a few views, as long as the administration sees it. That's all we care about. So we ended up posting it, and then boom, it went viral like 2 weeks later, because people across the nation were talking about, this is happening at our institution too. So it's not just a UCLA issue. It's whatever college you go to, period. You're going to run into these issues. And I'll get to that at the end about what the importance is about when you get into these college environments, is understanding that, but not letting it deter you from your success. All right. So the positives of what we got out of it, the aftermath, is institutional change. So they actually created a whole position called the Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. Didn't exist at UCLA at the time. Now you're seeing these positions pop up everywhere, at every institution. But UCLA didn't have one. And all of a sudden, because of our demands that we put forth, all of a sudden now it's a institutionally recognized position. So that was big for us. We understood like the impact of that, actually creating something brand new. But there's also some downfalls of that, and I'll let you know in a second. There's also curricular changes as well, where UCLA, out of all the UCs in the entire UC system, UCLA was the only one without a diversity GE requirement. And what a GE requirement is the general education requirement. So all freshmen are required to take certain courses and whatnot. And for GEs, every UC required you to take at least one ethnic studies class. And UCLA was the only one that didn't. And UCLA is one of the oldest UCs. So it was a big slap in the face to all students of color, because we were like, how come we can't even learn about our own people? And how come everybody on this campus is even learning about our own people, So that was big for us. Now, every freshman that will ever go to UCLA has to take a course on it. One of our other demands that we put forth was organizational change. So we had $0 left for our organization. The Black Male Institute, we were surviving off $20,000 for 5 years off of a grant. And that was it. And we were on our 5th year. We were this is our last hurrah. This was it. We figured, all right, if we're going to disband and this can be it, we might as well put something out there and make some noise. And that's exactly what we did. And because of the international and national support that we got, we ended up raising over $2 million worth of grant money for BMI. And now it's an institutionally recognized organization, which means that they can't just be disbanded because of lack of funding. They are guaranteed funding every year, no matter what. So that was huge for us. And we ended up using that money to create Sister to Sister, which is a Black male undergraduate research institute for Black women. Black Women Institute. Because the Black women at UCLA had to join the Black Male Institute if they wanted to engage in any, of this research that we were doing. So we were like, nah, they need their own organization. They shouldn't have to join ours and like have to deal with, doing research that didn't even involve them. And so what they did was we created Sister to Sister, and we ended up raising enough money to hire a whole faculty affiliate, someone to look over the whole program. And so we ended up recruiting a lot of Black women into that program that still exists today. And so we went from 11 members just off of that, like in the beginning, to now it's over like, I don't know, close to 100 probably between the two programs. So now Black students at UCLA, as soon as they hit the ground, they can join these organizations, they can, build community, all that, as soon as they get on campus. And then national change. We weren't the only ones. After this video came out, there was a whole bunch of other campaigns going across the nation. Even here at University of Michigan, there was hashtag BBUM, which is hashtag being Black at Michigan, University of Michigan. You can look that up on Twitter, Instagram, all that. It's still going to this day. There's another one called hashtag I2M Harvard, and it's Black students at Harvard talking about how they deserve to be at Harvard, being Black students and all the things that they go through. There's one at Oregon State University. They did one called the Black Beavers, and they even made a video themselves. So we started to see all these movements started to pop up across the nation. And even to this day, you still see it. And I think whenever you guys get to college, or if you're already in college, I mean, you are going to be a part of this no matter what. Last year, we saw record numbers in protests like we never seen before. Coming out for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the other, other victims of law enforcement violence and police brutality. And I think when colleges open back up, you're going to see that same rise. You're going to see that same rise up with students who were so fed up with what's going on in the world these last few years, and they're going to make some noise. And I hope you're all a part of that, because when it comes up to standing up against inequity, but also against just blatant oppression, you should never just stand by and let it happen. And as students, you have that ability to really make yourself known. But we couldn't do this alone. All right. So we had faculty affiliates. We had Dr. Tyrone Howard, who, once again, to this day, one of the best people on the planet, one of my big mentors, but he was a tenured professor, which means he had job security. So he had, we knew that we weren't going to go, rely on someone who maybe was just, a part-time faculty member or something like that, because we didn't want them to risk getting fired. And so we luckily had a person there who we knew no matter what, we're solid. We also had two administrators, Dr. Unina Montero and Dr. Yolanda Copeland Morgan, both women of color, both administrators. One just retired. Unina just retired recently. But at the time, they were integral in everything that we were doing. And then we have PhD students who are now, one of them is now the lead of Sister to Sister, because she's a faculty member now, which is Dr. Samara Blackman. But at the time, she was only a PhD student. So we had two PhD students, her and now Dr. Brian Woodward, and then a staff member, Rachel Thomas, who were also super helpful with us, right? But once again, this is a school with like more than 30,000 students, over, like hundreds of faculty members, like 50 administrators, and it only took 11 of us and these 6 people to change the entire university and all the things that I went through in that previous slide, right? So that's really all it takes. And you might look to yourself when you get in these environments and think, how am I going to do anything about it? This huge school or whatever, how am I going to make some noise? It doesn't take much. All it takes is for you to have a mission, a goal, and something to put forth to the world so that you can get support from other universities and build this, whole movement together, right? And I think it's easier than ever before to be able to do that. But at the same time, I know you're probably curious about the negative backlash. So I want to apologize what you're going to see in this next slide. There is going to be some harsh language, but I think it's important to see it because this is something I receive daily for especially the first year since the video release. And even to this day, I'll still get stuff, and it's 8 years later. But these are the type of comments, emails, things like that I will receive. And you can read through this if you like, but it's, I think we've all kind of gotten desensitized to it because we're all always on YouTube and Twitter and whatnot, and we see these anonymous threats and all that all the time, right? We see this negative backlash all the time. And I'm sure even for you all, like you're just used to it, but we shouldn't get used to it, right? And it sucks when it's directed at you because it becomes real. And at the time, it got so real to the point where they found my mom and dad's like office, their numbers, their address, and they started using that in their threats. Then they found my apartment number. Even like news media outlets would like wait outside my apartment till I woke up to walk to class, and they try to get me like for like interviews or whatever, trying to harass me and whatnot. So you see all this stuff and you think, damn, like, did I make a mistake? Right? You're thinking to yourself, like, maybe I did too much. Maybe like this isn't the right thing to do. And I'm not ready for all this. Cause once again, I was like 19, 20 years old at the time. So when you see all this, it did take a toll on my mental health. And it took a toll on all of our mental health, but because I was the face of it, I felt the burden of it. And I felt like I don't want to bring down somebody else. So I kind of left out like the homies in the video. I was like, you know what? I'll handle everything from here on out. It became like an ego thing almost. I was like, if I started this thing, I'm not going to throw you guys to the fire and make you burn too. Like I'll deal with it. And what they ended up kind of reminding me, it was like, yo, we did this together. We have to stick together. Like, we can't just let Cy, be out there to dry and just leave him by himself. So they all stepped up, and this whole thing wouldn't have been successful if it wasn't for them. Um, so that was like obviously huge for me, but I think it became, obviously really real because even Dr. Tyrone Howard, who was our mentor, he had to call an emergency meeting. And I didn't know this at the time, but my mom called him because she realized something was going on, and I wasn't telling her anything. And so she reached out directly to him and said, hey, look, I don't know what's going on over there or what my son's doing or whatever, but you have to make sure he's protected. And so she reached out to him, and he called an emergency meeting with us 11. And he said, hey, look, for the next 2-3 weeks until this all dies down, Cy has to be followed by at least 2 of you at a time. And so if he goes to the dining halls, if he goes to the library to study, if he goes to the gym, if he goes back home, you have to have at least somebody there with him at all times. And that was super helpful to me because obviously you don't want to be caught off guard or whatnot. But some of these threats were saying, I go to UCLA if I find you on campus, so and so forth, right? So that's when it got really real. And I didn't really know how to respond to that necessarily. But I knew my homies had my back, right? So I essentially had like security guards following me around for 2-3 weeks just to make sure I was all good. But it really came in handy because one day we were calling for, in that video, we were calling for affirmative action. And I'll get into that in a second. But we had a counter protest that happened on campus to protest our video. And it was from the Campus Republican group. And what they did was they set up what was called the Affirmative Action Bake Sale. And they got the idea from UC Berkeley, but they brought it down to UCLA. And they were basically making a mockery out of what we did. And so what they did, because we were calling for affirmative action, they were made fun of it by doing this bake sale where they made a bunch of cookies and brownies, and they sold to white students, they charged $5. To Asian students, they sold them for like $4. And then like, I don't know, I think like Latino students, it was like $2. And for Black students, it was free. And so they were just handing out cookies and, brownies to Black students. And they were like, yeah, see, white students, like, this is how unfair affirmative action is. Like, this is what they're calling for, right? Completely untrue, but that's what they were doing. And so it was at that time where these counter protests started popping up on campus where people were mad at us for what we were doing because we were only, 3.8% of the campus. But we had these, people coming at us because it was a predominantly white campus and they just weren't having it. And so it was actually one day we actually did a counter protest to that protest where we didn't want anybody to engage with them. So we blocked off Bruin Walk, which is the main walkway of UCLA, where everybody goes to class and all that. So we blocked it off. We all linked arms and everything. And there's still a way to get around to go to class. We just want to send a message like, don't engage with them, right? And so what we did when we locked arms is a bunch of white frat dudes came over and bum rushed the line. And like a whole fight broke out and it was just a mess. But if it wasn't for my guys being there, who would have known what would happen? And I think that was what Dr. Howard was calling for. He was like, you have to protect each other at all times because someone's going to try to do something in response. One of these people are going to actually be on campus and, try to come at you. You have to stick together. And that's exactly what we did. And that was the moment for me that I realized like, I can't do this alone. I shouldn't do this alone. And I got my guys with me no matter what. So that was more on the social level, but I'll get into the backlash on an administrative level because I think a lot of you are also probably interested in that too. We only had 2 administrators. Once again, I'm gonna go back to this this slide right here. So we only had Yanini Montero and Yolanda Copeland Morgan. That was it. And you might be asking, how come out of like 50 administrators, we only had 2 show up to like help us? And it was because of this guy. So Dr. Sanders, who is he's still a UCLA professor in the School of Law, he actually wrote a report 1 year before that video came out. And he was basically saying, all right, well, based on like test scores, based on GPA, ACT, GPA, whatever else like quantitative that he wanted to put out there, he said there are too many unaccounted for Black students on UCLA's campus. And if you just take test scores alone, all that, we're enrolling too many unqualified Black students, right? Keep in mind, we were less than 4% of the university. He was still saying that's too many. So we had this racist professor that put together this whole report, and we thought, nah, no one's going to agree with this. That's terrible. Like, no one would side with this guy. So we didn't think anything of it. And obviously, the year before, people were already up in arms about it, and they were calling for, him to be fired and all that. But really, we didn't understand the reality of it until we called a meeting with all university administrators, because the UCLA was getting heat from everywhere, from the whole nation, and their reputation was getting ruined. Their finances were getting ruined because they were like, damn, this dude just called us out and we had to respond. And so we said, hey, look, if you want to work with us, here's your chance, right? So we called this meeting, we put it all together. We had our conference room all reserved. 11 of us showed up. We had our demands there. We had our policy proposals there. We had everything. Dr. Tyrone Howard was there. We were set. We were just waiting for them to come. Waiting and waiting and waiting. An hour later, nobody showed up until those two showed up. And we asked them, where is everybody else? And they were like, unfortunately, they are part of Sanders' camp. And we were like, what the hell does that mean? And they told us about this whole report. And they were like, all the other 40 something else administrators, they actually side with him. And so they're not very happy about what you guys just did. So we're all you're going to get. And keep in mind, they're both women of color. So they had our back from the beginning. But all the other ones were mostly white men, and old white men for that matter. And so we're dealing with that where they wouldn't even show up, and they wouldn't even be, they really couldn't be held accountable either, because we didn't even know what they look like. They never talked to us on campus. We never see them. They're in their offices. They just stay there. And so we're just hoping that we can get something done. And finally we can talk to these people. They didn't even show up because they agreed with this dude. And so that's what really hit us in the reality of it. But we knew, hey, we still have our demands. The whole nation is looking at UCLA to do something about it, and we're not going anywhere until they do. And so we were like, we got to get some work done. So are you two willing to help us? And they were. And so with just two administrators, one professor, two PhD students, and one staff member, and then the 11 of us, we took on the entire university. And it worked, right? We ended up getting, what I just went over earlier of, these this response, right? Finally, the institution reacted. Now, there were things in our demands that weren't, unfortunately, like pushed forward, right? We called for a Black Resource Center, which is pretty common on a lot of campuses now. They're starting to pop up. But at the time, we were calling for like $2 million to be, invested into a Black Resource Center just for Black students at UCLA. And they declined it initially. But because after we left, student activists kept fighting for it, we actually ended up getting it approved in 2018, I believe. So now every student at UCLA, every Black student at UCLA has a whole center now where they can really engage with other Black students, build community, things like that. But we didn't have that at the time, right? So we were lucky enough to have those student activists carry on that legacy later on. And I never even met them. But to this day, we're more proud of them than I think they realize, because they kept our movement going. So with that being said, that was a lot to cover. I know that was super fast, but that's like pretty much the whole synopsis of what happened. And I can get into more details about the institution-based backlash. But for this last thing, I wanted to get into the celebritizing of activism. And this is going to piss a lot of people off, I'm sure. But this is something that I think has been happening pretty recently, where you see activists in quote unquote activists in like Cadillac commercials and, Nike commercials, things like that. We were like, all right, what happened? Because you used to be about it. And now, you kind of, you might be a little too invested in this other side, and they kind of co-opted the movement. Right. And we're starting to see that more and more. And I was wondering, how does that happen? Like, how do we get to that point where we're fighting against these systems and now we're like embedded with them? And it just didn't make any sense to me. So I had a harsh reality kind of hit me in the face in 2013 when this video first came out with Reverend Jesse Jackson. And a lot of people, if you're not familiar with who he is, he was a prominent civil rights activist back in the 60s. Best friends of Martin Luther King Jr. He was actually there when he was assassinated. But he also ran for president, I think in the 80s, I think it was. So like he is definitely, a very well-known civil rights activist of his time. Of his time is very key element when I say that. But even during this time, my dad, he grew up, at the same era, right? So my dad was already 20 when MLK was assassinated. So he was already kind of a grown man at that time. He was actually my age when my video came out, right? So he already kind of knew his world and my world were interlinked, and so many things didn't change in those 50 some years. And he was just wondering, all right, well, you got to be careful who you work with. And when I told him about Jesse Jackson, he was like, all right, he didn't really tell me nothing at the time. He was like, yeah, just go ahead, go work with them. Just, you know, let me know what happens. Right. So I was like, all right, I was excited. This dude is, whatever, he wants to work with us. Cool. So he actually called the office at UCLA that I work for. He was like, hey, I want to invite Cy to my birthday at the Beverly Hills Hilton at like that Saturday. And I was like, what the hell's going on? So I was like, all right, sure, I guess, but only if I could bring my guys, like my 11 guys in the video. He was like, yeah, it's fine. Everybody just dress up, make sure you look good, whatever, come over at this time, all that. So we show up, he pulls up in like this, Cadillac limo and all this stuff. We're like, all right, we're gonna ask him for some funding because we have $0 and we can tell this dude has money. So maybe he can help us out. So we're just excited about it. And we show up to the birthday. We ask him, hey, look, I know it's your birthday. We don't, no disrespect, but you reached out to us wanting to work. So like, when are we going to work? Because I don't know if you're leaving or after this or what. He's like, my flight leaves at my flight leaves early in the morning. Come here at 6 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. But tonight we're going to have fun, go network. He had like Shaka Khan singing him happy birthday on the stage while you're sitting down, all this stuff. So we're just sitting there watching all this like, oh, this dude for sure got money and everybody in the room has money. So maybe he can help us out and raise funding for this organization that was about to collapse, like if we didn't have support. So we show up 6 o'clock in the morning. He gives us breakfast, all that. He's being all nice to us, and his whole team is trying to, really talk to us about what we're trying to do. And then all of a sudden, when we give him these proposals and we hand over our stuff, he's like, all right, well, I have an idea. Maybe we can do this all through the Rainbow Coalition, like my organization. And maybe we can get you guys on my radio station. And then maybe we can do like a march under my name and I could do like a press conference and all that. And we were like, nah, we're good. Like we have our side like set. Like we know what we need to do. We don't need all this other stuff. Like, why are you trying to get involved with your organization stuff? He was like, well, you guys don't want to like, collaborate and do that. We're like, not really, because it's not, you don't really do the work that we're trying to do. So we're asking you as a, an activist, a prominent one, all you have to do is just kind of back us, like on a public level, just maybe have a press release or something and then help us with funding. Like we know what we need to get done. And he was like, all right, well, we'll take over this proposal. We'll see what we can do from here on out. And he just left. And we kept in touch with this team. We were like, all right, we're going to send you guys a new proposal in the next 2 weeks and we're going to have some good, right? And they were like, yeah, just send it over. Completely ghost us. And we don't hear from them ever again. And it pisses all of us off because we were almost depending on them for this fund. We didn't get that grant money yet, the $2 million yet. All that money didn't roll in. And so we were just waiting, like, is this it for us? Like, we put in so much energy and effort to get this guy to pay attention. And because we didn't want to back his political agenda, all of a sudden he just ghosted us and we weren't anything to him. And I think that was a big reminder to us, like, we can't rely on celebrity activists. Like, it's almost like when they get too famous, we can't, there's a reason why. And the reason why that we get hesitant and skeptical of this is when white people higher up start to see you as like someone they can work with, that means you're messing up. Like something's wrong here. Because if they feel like you welcomed in that space or whatever, they're seeing something in you that they can take advantage of. Especially with these big time companies, organizations, whatever it is, they know you're not radical enough for us to be scared of you. So that means let's try to, get in bed with you and try to do all this other stuff where like now you're a part of our agenda and now you can't back out. I mean, so we're seeing this now, but like we saw it happen even within our own people, right? Where like he's a politician essentially, and he even ran for president once again, right? So we knew he was a politician. But when I told my dad about this, he was like, I didn't want to warn you because I didn't know if he changed or not, but yeah, I could have saw this coming. And you could read Black Power by Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael. And he talks about Reverend Jesse Jackson, about how, half the movement went political, half the movement knew the answer wasn't in politics. And with him running for president, he sacrificed a lot of who he was at the time to get whatever he could do to get in the room with these white politicians. And sometimes when you sacrifice that, you sacrifice who you are as a person. And it's, it makes sense, right? Like you have to get there somehow, but you also can't claim to be about the people if you're no longer with the people. And so for us, I think that was a big reality for us to deal with. It was hard for us to recover from that. A lot of our activists started to like kind of drop out and realize like, damn, like maybe that was our only shot. But it wasn't, right? Like all of a sudden we started getting this grant money coming in. All of a sudden it brought new life within this organization because we knew we could stay around. And all of a sudden we started recruiting. The next year we had like 60 members of BMI instead of 11. And then the next year kept growing. We had Sister to Sister where we had Black women joining, all that. We were like, oh man, like this is what we needed. But it took a while, right? It maybe took a year and a half, and all of a sudden it boomed. And I think that was what we had to deal with at the time. We wanted these quick results. And it doesn't take years. It doesn't take 5-10 years like they'll tell you. It can get done in 1 year. It can get done in a year and a half. But for us, that felt like forever because we were about to graduate. And we were like, nah, before we leave, we got to make our mark. And what I always remind activists who were juniors and seniors is my ego was my biggest enemy, where I didn't want to give up being the lead of this whole movement because some freshman and sophomore may have screwed it up, right? I was like, nah, if we're talking to MSNBC on live television, I can't have a freshman up there screwing it up. Like if you say one bad thing, our whole movement's screwed. So I didn't want that to happen. And so I didn't trust them enough and I didn't train them enough to where when we left, we would be good. And so even like a couple years after we left, there was a kind of a lull with student activism at UCLA because we just didn't like have our demands and like train these freshmen and sophomores to carry on our legacy at all. Luckily, they did it anyway, a few years down the road by their own volition. That's to their own credit. But we had nothing to do with that. And I think it was my fault because I didn't trust these freshmen and sophomores. And so if I were to give any advice to activists these days is avoid activist turnaround as much as you can. Because when we talk about administrators being happy that I left, they were thrilled. They were thrilled all of us were gone. But if we keep these freshmen and sophomores involved and keep applying that pressure, they can't ever, put the foot off the gas. They have to listen to us no matter what. And that's something that I didn't recognize at the time. I know I was young and, I was just, it was all ego, right? It was all the notoriety of the campaign and all that. I was like, I have to get it right. I have to get it right. And I should have opened myself up to more collaboration, but I didn't. So I always remind student activists like, yo, learn from my mistakes. Don't let the ego get to you. You have to understand it takes so many of you to get this done. It can be so much more effective when the more people you recruit and engage during this whole process. And so with that being said, my last slide here is bundling up. I know a lot of people, the backlash I get is you're going to deter people from applying to UCLA. And, how come you're going to see Black student numbers drop even more if they keep hearing all these bad things? I'm like, no, it's not just UCLA. I've been to UCLA, University of Pennsylvania for a master's. So that was the Ivy League. So that's extra white. Then I went to USC for my PhD. And then now I'm at University of Michigan for a postdoc, right? So I've been to 4 different universities, 4 different kinds of universities, big private, small private, big public, you know what I'm saying? No matter where I was at 4 universities already, same thing. And it doesn't matter. And that's what I always tell students, like you have to bundle up no matter where you go. And the reason why I use this metaphor is because when we talk about the racial climate of an institution, we talk about campus racial climate. There's a reason why we use that metaphor, because it can feel like you're freezing when you get on campus and you feel like, damn, I'm frozen out of this whole community because of the color of my skin, right? And you can't find community. And so the metaphor I was use is, all right, I was in LA for 10 years. I was in the Bay my whole life before that, right? And so when I was moving here, people always told me bundle up, right? It's going to be -6 degrees out there. You have to be ready. You can't be out here in shorts and flip-flops like you were in LA. But if I wasn't ready and nobody told me that, I would be going outside in the height of winter in -6 degrees, freezing my ass off essentially, right? So you have to treat college university campuses the same way with campus racial climate. When you get to a university, you have to bundle up with the knowledge of understanding no matter what environment I go into, college or not, if it's a workplace, no matter what, you have to bundle up with that knowledge to be ready, that no matter what they throw at me, I'm gonna be ready. No matter what that weather is outside, I can go out there and yes, it'll be cold, but I'm not gonna freeze my butt off. Like I'll be prepared. And I think with a lot of college students, they're so excited to go to college, but they forget like, hey, that's still a reality though. You made it. You did so much to get to this point. Your parents or guardians should be very proud of you. You should be proud of yourself. But when you get to that environment, understand that pride, keep that pride, but keep that pride for your people, for your community, and understand you have to be ready when you get into that. Just like you have to be ready to go outside, right? So I always tell students, bundle up, be ready. You're going to be fine. You're going to get through this storm together. And as long as you bundle up together and you understand that, like, no matter what from here on out, nobody can stop you if you stick together. And you know, you could be like me, who I try to take on a whole university by myself. You're going to freeze your ass off, right? So don't do what I did. You know, keep with your community. Make sure that they have your back, you have their back equally. But you know, just don't stop. You know, don't stop this movement just because it gets cold every now and then. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're gonna be just fine if you got this far. So I don't want to take, you know, too much time out of this, because I do want to leave some time for questions. But I just want to thank all of you for, you know, for being here. I know there's people might be watching after this that come through. So thank you for choosing this to watch. And if anybody has, you know, any questions or anything and wants to contact me, I could also provide my contact info in the chat box as well. So appreciate y'all.
Phenomenal. Thank you, Dr. Stokes, for that. That was great. Even, you know, we had a vision for your workshop, and you've exceeded those expectations and that vision. So thank you for that. Thank you for all you've done. Yeah, and just being a part of the movement. So having said that, you talked about bundling up, and it's even been mentioned in the chat how people love the concept. I love it as well. And so I wanted to start out with the first question. I am going to ask you, if you do have a question, for those of us who are live, to go ahead and put your question in the Q&A in the chat box now. We're going to ask a couple questions, and then we're going to wrap for today. So go ahead and put your questions in now. I'm going to start with the very first question regarding the concept and piggybacking and playing off of the concept of bundling up. So can you talk to and speak to the power of data, particularly disaggregated data? That's what I saw when I watched your video. You know, I know Dr. Howard and Tyrone's great. He was actually a keynote speaker for our Spring Summit a couple years back. Phenomenal guy, phenomenal brother, like you mentioned. But I would say that your group's level of sophistication, you definitely benefited from the power of mentors, right? And his mentorship and other people's mentorship. So having said all that, it's enough of a preamble. Can you talk about the power of disaggregated data to help get things done?
Definitely. So let's talk about aggregated data for sure, for people who aren't familiar. Aggregated data, let's take UCLA, right? They say, all right, no, actually, let's take like Penn or something, right? Like some like elite, you know, white institution, everybody, you know, like Ivy League, whatever. You'll hear people say the campus has more students of color than there are white students. And so that could mean a billion things, because out of that students of color group, there's how many groups of color? Like 50 or something like that, even based on the US Census, there's like a billion options you could choose. But then they just say white students are 48%, but then the 52% are students of color. You're like, wait, but that means that black students may only be 3%, and the rest of them are everything else. You know what I'm saying? So it's not really diverse. You just have basically half the school is white. So how come that's diverse in your eyes? So when you disaggregate the data, you get more specific about it. You're like, all right, well, out of that students of color section, how much is really, you know, international students? How many are Asian students? What ethnicity Asian are we talking about? Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Cambodian? You know, what are we talking about here? And so when you start to disaggregate it, you get this really specific data. It brings a lot of credit to what you're doing. And we shouldn't need that. We should just be able to tell them straight up, your institution is racist because of this, this, and this. And we should just be able to say that. But it's not the case, because numbers don't lie. And they know numbers don't lie. And I think that's the biggest impact that we had, was knowing that they kept this data private. Like, they did not want this to get released. They specifically told us, don't release this data. Like, this is only for a class and for your Black Male Institute, you know, workshops and undergraduate research stuff that you guys are doing, just for like practice and what research is like. That's all they wanted us to do. We obviously didn't listen. And we were like, hey, if we release it before they can catch us, like, what are they going to do? Deny it? Like, no, these are the real numbers. So deal with it. And I think a lot of people realize that, like, damn, like, the numbers really spoke more than anything else we said in that video. Is they just keyed in on that. And that really boosted everything that we did because it gave legitimacy to it. It wasn't just our emotions. It wasn't just, who we are as people. They couldn't just call us radical and stupid and all this other stuff. We're like, no, 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 no. We have numbers. We did our research. We did everything we needed to be on your level with that language too. But we also bring our own little spice to it too. So I think that was the power of the data. So.
Phenomenal. Keep the questions coming. The next question is, you talked about, let's go with this one. You talked about the importance of protecting each other and sticking together. And so can you talk about that, the importance of that, and just the importance of solidarity in general? In terms
so
of
I'm gonna tell you what I didn't do. This is another mistake that I think a lot of people can learn from, once again, based on ego. So once again, I was 19, 20 years old. I was taking on this whole thing, trying to do it by myself because I just felt like I needed to. But at the time, there was actually beef between, oh, hello. This is Speedy, by the way. Good to meet you, buddy. Hello. Oh,
hi, Speedy. I'm going to interject real quick because I was asked by my boss, Tony, if you were going to talk about the cats, and the cat has made an appearance and made a cameo. That's an inside joke for all of social media. He's all about the cats and repping the cats.
Hell yeah. And I have my little Black Panther somewhere, but she's probably sleeping. And then my other two cats back in the Bay are named Steph and Curry. So I always rep my doves no matter what. What was I saying? Yeah, ego. So when we talk about being, 1920s, trying to take on this whole thing by myself, we actually had beef between the Black Male Institute, which was just a small organization of just undergraduate research cohort, and what was called the African Student Union, or some schools have Black Student Union, right? Relatively the same thing. Some schools have both. We had the African Student Union, which had like 150 members in it or something. Like, they had numbers for sure, but we were pissed at them because we were saying, how come like no activism has really happened really in like decades at this school, but you guys have like pretty much all the Black students involved in your organization? Like, we need to like make some noise here. Like, what is going on? And they kind of were reluctant because half of them were, radical like us, and they were about it. Some of them weren't. They were just kind of a part of organization that wanted a community. But we were like, we have to get something done, y'all. Like, we can't just be sitting here. And so we ended up doing this on our own. And we were like, fine, if there's 150 youth that don't want to be involved, we're going to take it on by ourselves. And we did. And when this blew up, all of a sudden we started getting these people from ASU claiming like, yeah, that's our movement, that's us, blah, blah. We were like, no, it's not. We did this because you weren't doing anything. Like, this is our response because we knew like that something had to get done before we graduated. And once again, that should have never been the case. That was my bad. And, admittedly, some of the others in the group, because they were a part of both groups, and they had to take the heat of like, how come you guys did this without us knowing and all that? They were like, because you guys just wouldn't have done it. And they also didn't like me too. I'll tell you straight up, like, they were like, oh, he's not Black enough to do this. They should have had somebody else. Like, he should have wrote for somebody else and had them do it. I was like, I'm not doing all that. Like, I know who I am. I know who I'll come from. My dad didn't tell me to ghostwrite for another person to get my work out. Like, he's like, no, just, you're Black. And no matter what, how people try to discredit that, be proud of that. And so I knew no matter what, like, it wasn't just me in that video either. It was 11 of us. And I knew that was really symbolic too, because they had my back from the beginning to the end. But I think if that ego didn't get in the way and we built solidarity with ASU, we could have had 150 members helping us out instead of just 11 of us trying to tackle the whole university. But because of that ego, and because we were so reluctant to give it away and to allow other people in, because we had, extreme trust issues with anything university related. And we were like, no, they're going to ruin it. And they're going to co-opt this whole thing. And now our whole mission is going to be gone. And it's going to be too many voices in the room. That's crap. And, there's never too many voices in the room, because sometimes they can tell you things that you never heard or never considered. And so we ended up by the end recruiting the president of ASU. And so that was great. But like, even the other members are very reluctant to really engage with us for a very valid reason. Like, they had a reason to be pissed at us. We had a reason to be pissed at them too, but at the same time, we had less than 4% Black students on campus and we were split. Like, what's the point of that? Like, we're already so small. Why are we fighting amongst each other? That's something I learned way down the road about like what we could have done differently. Is to build solidarity, not amongst even ASU and BMI, but with like, the Asian American Student Union, like even like the Jewish Student Union, Latinx student unions, things like that. So when we have these opportunities and we screw it up, I think the whole movement suffers, and it did for us. But we obviously had the impact that we imagined, but we could have done so much more if we weren't so caught up in like the logistics and the ego at all. So I think if anybody's watching, let that shit go. So yeah.
Thank you for keeping it real. All right, so Stefan's got a great question here. He says, as a professional within an emerging university program, and shout out to Stefan, he's one of our MSA alums and is doing big things to help empower our people. He says, what would be your advice and tips to ensure the advocacy of our people in terms of enrollment, program representation, and otherwise?
Definitely, that's a great question. Yeah, thank you for that question. I appreciate it. This is tough. This is tough because we're doing this every day, but I think what we end up doing is like going back to the same practices and procedures and trying to recruit, trying to enroll through those same avenues. And when we do that, we limit our imagination. And when we limit our imagination because we start to perform within the system and doing whatever we can to get as many Black students as we can within our current framework, we're doomed from the start, right? Like if we don't have resources because the institution doesn't really care genuinely, well then we're just working with scraps. So sometimes we have to go outside of the realm here and not even ask for it. Sometimes we have to recruit because the university is not telling us to recruit, but we have a group of faculty and staff to go to these high schools on the weekends or whatever it is, put together these seminars like this, even like conferences, things like that, where it's not institutionally affiliated, but you can still put something together, even if for just 1 hour out of the day, and go to a school and a community that the university doesn't even engage with at all. Say, fine, we'll do it. And once you start to recognize that this works and that we're getting incredible students from these environments, even if it's just 4 or 5 out of the 15 high schools you go to, that's 4 or 5 students that reach back to their younger siblings and classmates. All of a sudden, now you got a whole nother avenue of students coming in. And I think that's what happens with UCLA, where they don't care unless you play sports. They're not going to go into Compton and Inglewood. And so BMI, what Black Male Institute did, is they created a whole different, what's called VIPs. So it's VIP scholars. They created a whole different program where they went to these high schools that a lot of the guys in the video actually went to. And they said, nah, we know our people. I'll go there. I know all the teachers. I know all the principals, all that. I'll email them, say, hey, could we come in, give a few talks, whatever. And then we ended up recruiting through these schools. And so to this day, we're still recruiting from them, even though university at the time, we weren't a university affiliated institution. And so now that we are, now it's become like ingrained within the institution. So I think, it start small, start with just you and do whatever you got to do your way until they recognize, the reality of it all, which is you probably do it better than they do. And you're reaching the students that they can't reach. Like that's our secret power, is like, I can go into a school and talk to certain students, and if an old white dude did it, nobody's going to that school. Sorry. So I think that's the benefit that we all have, right? It's just utilize that to our advantage for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's great. Okay. So last question for you is, you talked about getting the ego out of the way, and you said that your ego was the biggest enemy. So we really appreciate you sharing the positives and the challenges, and really helping us to sort of deconstruct and I would say even, just help us with that. So the question is, you mentioned a reluctance to, particularly in your younger years, to trust and train the youth, and with activism, with just and there's an understandable reluctance to that, because you're invested in the work. We understand the power of this work, but at the same time, we've got to empower the youth to keep the work going, as you mentioned. So can you speak to the approach and mindset in terms of trusting and training the youth to be activists?
Absolutely. It's incredibly important, once again, for continuing on the legacy. But I think it's also like, if we're talking just like logistics and like seeing it in practice. Say if I was a senior and I was trying to get freshmen and sophomores involved, they don't need to be in front of the cameras and doing press conferences. Like, there's so many different avenues of activism and different things that you can do on the back end that don't require to be the face of certain things. And you shouldn't even need to have a face, right? You should be a collective anyway. We happen to have one because we was like a video, and obviously that's what happens. But some of these campaigns, they don't have that. It's just a movement of a group or a union that ends up collectively asking for something. But I think even in the workplace, right? If you just get there and you have some senior person who's been there for 10 years, you don't want to step on their toes. Like, do you know that they've been like grinding for so long? Allow them to get their shine and to really advocate for what's important. But on the back end, teaching these freshmen and sophomores, for example, of like, hey, this is what it looks like. This is what it requires. This is the reading that you have to do when they ask you these questions. Because I think a lot of the time, freshmen and sophomores just aren't exposed to it. Like, you're coming from high school where the K through 12 curriculum is Eurocentric. You don't even learn about your own people. You don't learn about your own history. None of that. And so all of that happens. I only got to talk because I was an African American Studies major at UCLA, and I purposely took these classes because I want to learn more about my people. But if you don't have that opportunity, especially if you're in a STEM major or something like that, it's all voluntary. Like, that work is something you have to put in on your own. The institution's not going to make you do it for a grade, right? And so I think when we do that, a lot of it's just that back end work of like, how do we really engage with these students, whether it's a pamphlet we put together with all the key facts, or just a list of readings, even with our own. If I can go back in time, I create a Black Bruin syllabus for freshmen and sophomores, just so they can have these key readings that they can look at and say, that's why we can't do this. This is why we can't trust these people. Why we can trust these people. Like, and really power mapping the university to understand how these constituents work and why. But if you never learn that, I think that was my fear of just like, damn, I have to do that. And I should have said, damn right you do. Like, if you want to engage with this work, you better put in the work too of training the next generation. Because if you don't, this movement doesn't mean anything. It's all ego. It's all you. And I think that's something I had to get away from and understand, like, no. We can make this huge. And for years, for 5, 10, 20 years down the road, to make this never end if we just keep, buffing up this syllabus that we have and strengthening it until finally, when these freshmen come in, they'll just be ready to hit the ground running and, be leaders of their own movements, as soon as they hit the ground. So I think that's the beautiful thing about it, but that was a downfall of us for sure. So.
Fantastic. And then you mentioned a concept that I want to make sure we underscore. So, and just some people may not be familiar with it. So can you explain what power mapping is and help us to understand how important that is to activism work?
Absolutely. And Stefan, thank you for the shout out in the chat for sure. Let me know if I could help you with that too. You got my email. And so, yeah, so the power mapping. So this is something where when I was talking about the Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, right? And we called for that as one of our demands. We shouldn't have called for that. And I'll tell you why. You see a lot of these positions opening up across universities across the nation. There's a reason why. And it's because they don't give any power to these positions. They're there as like kind of like a performative gesture of like, yeah, see, we value diversity. We have this vice chancellor here. Then you ask, like, what do you actually do? Like, can you influence policy? Can you talk to the president? Whatever. It's like, no, not really. All they do is collect racial harassment claims or anything equity related, or like Title IX claims, things like that. And they give maybe a keynote or a speech or something like that, and maybe advocate for students in that way. But really, they're like they're just there as a performative gesture. And it's not their fault. We need those people there to like be in the room at least. But like, they have no influence on the policy of the school. So what we should have asked for, instead of a vice chancellor for diversity, equity, inclusion, is a CDO, which is a chief diversity officer. And when you have that chief in your name, that means you're directly, like, you're only responding to the president, and you're literally in the room with the board members, with everybody involved, influencing policy on the institutional level. But if you're just a staff member, which is once again, get your money, get the job, advocate for your students. But when you only call for that as a demand for us, we were like, damn, we really just called for something and they gave it to us like that. We should have been skeptical when they gave it to us that quick. And they gave it to us that quick because they knew they didn't really have to change anything systemic to hire a person like that. They were just like, yeah, here you go. And we're still going to do everything else like we were doing for the last 400 years. Like, we're not going to change a thing. And so I think if I were to go back in time and call for something else in our demands, it would have been for more people in positions of power on that level, more like senior level administrators, of creating a whole different position that would force the institution to have to actually have someone in the room that can influence policy and could get in their face about certain issues, which is obviously difficult to find, but there are people out there who are willing to do it, and we should have called for it. But yeah, that's when we talk about power mapping, is understanding people's position of power, what they can and cannot do, and even when it comes to demands, who are we submitting these demands to? Are these people even involved? Like, can they even do anything to help with our demands at all? Because if not, we're wasting our ink, you know. But if we go directly at the president, we go directly at these chief officers of the university, of admissions, of things like that, we know we have the right ears. But you have to know via power mapping who those people are and which constituents can actually help you in the end. Because if not, you're just wasting your time. So
That's great. Understanding, yeah, the importance. So I appreciate you explaining that to us, the importance of power dynamics and positionality.
Question I have for you, because I was on both sides. So I was the chief of staff to the vice president. So I knew what was going on behind the scenes. Mentioned what you mentioned at the table with the president and the other people. But I was also connected to the students. The struggle that I had is that I felt that a lot of the students were fighting against, particularly the vice president at the time, against the ones who was really the only one at the table wanting this to happen. And I felt like, wow. I mean, I was in some meetings where it was intense. I mean, if I were called some of the things that she was called, the West Philly in me would have came out. It was like real intense. So, it made me think, like, here's the question, as long as I say, here's the question. How do you balance your, that fight to get things done while still partnering with the true administrators who's on your side? And I didn't feel like that was happening. I felt like we were being attacked. I mean, every day I was ready for battle because we had like 150 students in there. But I'm like, guys, you're fighting against the one who's the only one at the table to make this happen. So I don't know. I said that was a lot, but how do you strike that balance between that? All administrators aren't bad. There are really some that's on your side.
Yeah, I think obviously being on the student activist side, like, we all see y'all as the enemy. You know, it's just because we don't know, right? We don't power map, and no one teaches us like what we could actually do. No one tells us. There's no transparency either, so we all think you're just the same because we're getting the same messages from the same person who sends out these campus-wide emails, and that's really the only interaction we have. So we just lump all of you together and we say that's it. But as you can see from who we work with, right, we had two administrators that blatantly called out their coworkers, and which is very uncommon. But they had job security, obviously, and that was great. But like, we had senior level administrators in the room saying, no, they're part of Sanders camp. They're not a part of us. Like, they all believe what that guy said. We're not in the same boat. So that's why we're here in a different capacity. And I think a lot of staff members are kind of hesitant to do that because you don't want to step on the toes of somebody, especially if you're junior level faculty or something like that. But if you do have that capacity and that power to just straight up say, hey, that person over there, yes, we agree. That's not what we're about. That they don't align with their institutional values and nothing like that. But hey, there's nothing we can do about it right now. So what we can do is understand, I got mine on your side. This is why. And these are the people who maybe you should avoid. And you don't have to say that in an official capacity through an email or anything. Don't leave any chain of that anywhere. But if you're in these meetings with them face to face, I think it's that transparent that we loved, because Dr. Tyron Howard told us, he was like, these are the people you probably shouldn't talk to. And, don't even waste your time because you got us, you got this person, this person, this person. Don't really open yourself up to anybody else because they might screw you over. And so just know that him being there for like 20 years or whatever it is, he knew, like, that's information that he gave us that allowed us to trust him, because we were like, oh, you're really not about this institution and protecting it because like, you just called out your own coworkers and understanding like, hey, maybe they're not about it. So I wouldn't say that, like, put yourself at risk if you're a junior level, a faculty or administrator in that capacity. I don't want to get your, in your pockets and get you fired and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's so valuable when we hear that transparency from that level and the difference of like, you're actually on our side too, because you're a victim of it too, of being in this room and have to deal with this every day. We just think you're one of them. But if you kind of separate yourself, it's like, oh, whew, like we actually do have someone in the room like that cares about us, But